So we'll cover or I'll review then. Let's watch that little bit left. We have about 10 minutes left of the decisive battle. So we got to see what happens at that battle using video game technology. Aren't you sad we no more video game technology ever again? They should bring that series back so we just do every battle in video game. And I don't want modern, I want like 2003 video game technology. That's what I want. Or maybe video game technology and just have it all like Pong. So, oops, that's the wrong page. And then I will go over it's freezing on me. Okay, I think it's so just a little bit left, and I'll review anything, talk about just a little bit more about the fall of Rome, and then we're going to do it just a very, I'll answer any questions. I got an Islam map, and that's where we'll go. So let me get this set up for online. August has got something on his camera, I just noticed that. So let me know if this works. Here we go.
His fearlessness, and then he actually created a funeral pyre and threatened to empty himself. So little did he value his own life.
This is where Attila looked like he had lost the battle. He retreated back, and then he made his own funeral pile. So stacked up wood, and he was going to lay on it. I'll kill myself since you want somebody else. And that is unusual. Stalin would do the same thing, not kill himself, but oh, I'm getting old. You know, maybe someone else should take. You know, maybe Molotov should take over. Of course, he was just testing him to see who'd be the first one to say, I'll do it, and then they're gone. Okay, so back to this.
And so much did he value the reputation that he would die undefeated.
Neither of these two great commanders, they didn't know what the casualties were that they had inflicted. They knew, however, that their own troops were terribly bloodied. These two armies had exhausted themselves.
Aetius probably got little sleep. He was left with a real dilemma. On the one hand, he had the opportunity to crush Attila once and for all. On the other, he had to consider the future security of the empire. The Visigoths had only supported him because of Attila's invasion. The Vandals were also unreliable. These tribes only stayed in line because of a Hun menace. Remove that and warfare could break out all over the West.
There was the perception that maybe the destruction of the Hunnish army might embolden other tribes that are now our allies, but after the battle will be our enemies.
And back at Ravenna, the governing center of the empire, the Emperor Valentinian was worried that Aetius was now the most powerful man in the West. To the people, he was the heir to the Roman generals of old. Already they were calling him the last of the Romans.
The next morning, it's essentially a stalemate. The Huns are in possession of their lager, and the Romans are in possession of the battlefield, which meant that the Romans won, but the Huns were still there.
The ancient sources tell us that Aetius only reached his decision on the following morning, when two things happened. First, the body of Theodoric was recovered, and his son Thorismund was proclaimed to be the new king of the Visigoths. Second, it was obvious that Attila was trying to pull out rather than prepare for another battle.
Attila withdrew the next day because he realized that his army was in no condition. Once dawn rose and they saw the horrific carnage on the battlefield and tens of thousands killed, he realized he was in no position to press home the attack.
Aetius knew his own personal standing was high. He had just beaten Attila the Hun, the scourge of Europe. But could he trust the Visigoths now that they had a new king? And what about Gaiseric the Vandal? The Hun invasion had been his idea. Aetius had done enough. Attila was in retreat. The West was safe. he decided to take his close-fought victory and attempt to strengthen the Roman position.
I think that what the battle did was it brought people together. It brought the military and political forces of the empire in the West together one last time.
The mauling that Aetius gave Attila at Chalon was to prove the deciding factor. True to form, the Huns launched another lightning campaign against the Romans the following year. They swept down into Italy, utterly destroying the land as they went. But a Roman counter-strike against Attila's own land across the Danube was enough to make Attila agree to a peace. He just didn't have the men to protect his borders any longer. Aetius had killed too many of them at Chalon. The following year, Attila the Hun died as he had lived, bloodily. He married a young bride, drank so much that when he had a nosebleed, he drowned in his own blood. Without their fearsome leader, the empire of the Huns splintered and fell apart. And as for Aetius, his story ends badly as well. A few years after Chalon, he tried to marry Eudoxia, the daughter of Valentinian. In a jealous rage, Valentinian stabbed him to death. The last of the Romans was killed by his own emperor.
All right, so that's the last big battle, and that would be it. I mean, that's 451, 452. Attila made the dramatic. Oh, we're not going off UFOs. This is for special topics. Look to the skies. Okay. All right, so let's do just a last tiny little bit of notes, and then we will finish up. And then I'll review anything you want. And there is going to be an Islamic map that's going to drop. Got to use the proper terminology.
Can we review UFOs?
No, you're not ready for them. Unless you want to review UFOs?
I mean, they have to build the pyramids somehow.
There's this whole thing called Chariots of the Gods. And they had this whole thing where the flying saucers came down, and people were too dumb to build anything, so they must have been done by UFOs. And it was a big deal. I was a little kid, I was scared of flying saucers, so so a little scared. They're worrisome. Okay, so a couple of things. I think did we have this? This should be on Friday. Did we get this? But the Visigoths, and the big thing about that one is, they did sack Rome. They were defeated at Adrianople. So it's not about the Visigoths, these are the barbarian invasions, the Battle of Chalons, and I hope everyone can see this okay. Am I recording? Good. And this is when they would attack and sack Rome. And I think we got right to, okay, I put a bunch of stuff here. I wasn't sure how much I want to talk about them. But just make sure we know that the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes, these are Germanic tribes that crossed the Channel, and they invaded British Britannia. They invaded Roman Britain. And that's where you get the Anglo-Saxons. Angles, England. That's where that comes from. And so that would be the Germanic tribe, and then it'd be the Norse who would invade and kind of give Britain that kind of hodgepodge of various people, the Normans. And that's coming up with other stories. I just wanted to make sure we got the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes. Wales would be somewhat isolated from them, and that would still be the same Celtic people. And then they would be conquered by the English or the Norman, yeah. And the greatest castle in the world is right there, just so you know, in the world, Harlech. So, also the Vandals. The Vandals were another invader, and their great leader is Genseric. And look how long he lived. Think about, okay, they were not barbarians, like actually, even though they were relatively nomadic, and so they had to carry everything. They still had armor. They still, most of them had converted to Christianity. But look how long he lived. at that time. That's pretty amazing. Of course, the thing is, once you got past 1 or 2, you had a chance to live a relatively long life as long as you weren't a slave. And he would invade, the Vandals would sweep here, then sweep around this way, and as they were approaching, they would approach Carthage right here, and when they approached Carthage, St. Augustine, who was in the Roman city of Carthage, one of the most important cities in the entire region, when he was there and he saw the Vandals coming, he saw it's the end of the universe. The end of the world is coming. And that's where he wrote City of God. We're saying we must retract, pull back to God. And that's where the beginnings of monasticism, which is go to monasteries. And pull back to these monasteries and hold on to Christianity. And the big thing about St. Augustine, when he looked at it, is, okay, the world here is falling apart. What is the only thing that matters? The afterlife. And so that's what you got to get down. That's what he pushed on. We'll go back there and prepare for the afterlife. And St. Augustine would have great influence because these monasteries would be a twofold thing. They would preserve much of the old Roman writing, even though they pretty soon didn't know how to read it anymore. They just see these books being eaten by worms as they sit there in their libraries. So they preserved that, but it also set an entire stage of middle-age thinking where this world doesn't matter, it's the afterlife. And you see the medieval art where they draw everything on its importance to God in no proportion. That comes from St. Augustine. And the Vandals, that's where we get, of course, the term vandalism. But in 455 BC, they would sack Rome. And another one, this is the second time now Rome's been sacked in 50 years. And they would set up this Vandal kingdom, and it would last well into the 6th century. I think I put this down. Here's the sack of Rome. This is a Renaissance painting, but they really take great glee in they want to show women being taken away. But the other thing is too, so they want to show the sack of Rome, so they show them destroying one of these triumphal arches. But you notice how they draw it like it was the way it looked in 1600. Like it was already this old ancient thing. And you see a lot of that. You know, they don't have it drawn. You know, they're painting like it's 1600. And the Eastern Roman empires, we call today the Byzantines, they destroy the Vandals in the next century. Then they get the Black Plague. So we had the Huns. So that's what we had yesterday, or Friday. They swept in, defeated the Gauls, and that's where we have Attila, right? And I think I told you this story about Attila, but we're going to jump right. Don't worry about this. This is where we get Chalons, Catalonian field. That's the battle we just saw. This great victory, Aetius. So I've not been to this battlefield. That's one I really wish I could go to. My wife and I were driving through France, and it was one of those things we just ran out of time. And she's very patient with me wanting to go to battlefields all the time in all these places. And she likes some of them, but we want to go to this place in World War I you've probably heard of, and remember a place called Verdun. And we want to get there early enough and said, let's just go there. And that turned out to be an amazing trip. But we've already met, this is stuff we saw in the video, right? And then Valentinian would furious and eventually kill him. So this is stuff we saw in the video. So this is from the battlefield here. So 452, they just mentioned very quickly. Attila would make one more last gasp and invade into Rome. And invaded in northern Rome, and the Ostrogoths had their capital at Ravenna, and they would sometimes force the Western Emperor there. He took Vienna, but used this as a pretense when he was they thought he violated a wedding agreement, but this is what we have to get. Don't worry about that, that's not outside of that story. He stopped at the Po River. And this is one, he literally ran out of troops. His rear guard was surrounded, and his flanks were threatened by not only Romans but Ostrogoths. But it's come down in Christian tradition that it was St. Peter and St. Paul. So Peter we just mentioned briefly. Paul would be the person who spread Christianity through Greece, gave it much of its Greek roots, Christianity. He would be murdered. St. Peter would be crucified, or Paul would be executed. But their interaction, Attila saw them and turned back. And this will become part of Christian mythology. The idea was, oh, sure, the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire will collapse. But Christianity, the empire of God, will survive. And that fits in with the St. Augustine idea. The scourge of God can do whatever he wants, but will stop with the interaction of God through St. Peter and St. Paul. And then what happened? Oh, so that's supposed to be the interaction right there. And that's St. Paul and St. Peter right there. And then they mentioned in the video the next year he got married, got drunk, nosebleed. Here's a medieval drawing of that. There's the nosebleed. I just thought that picture was really funny. In a very dark way. Got watercolor. And the Huns would retreat, but they would not be the other. There'd be more Germanic warriors. The Magyars would come through. And then the most famous of them all, the Mongols. But they're coming a little bit later. And so with that, it was only a matter of time before Rome was going to fall. We don't know where Odoacer was from. But Odoacer would be a barbarian general. He was Roman. He had been trained with the Romans. He was clearly Germanic. He very well could have been some Goth, Visigoth, Ostrogoth. We're not sure. But he could have been, there's sort of him maybe an Alemanni, which lived right up here. But he swept into Rome, and there was no Roman army left. There was still an emperor of the Western Roman Empire, but he had no control over anything. The Visigoths had controlled this, the Vandals, the Savani, the Franks were moving into here to form a massive Frankish kingdom, France. Angles and Saxons moved up into there. So we don't know exactly what he was. He was barbarian. But he deposed the last emperor. Romulus Augustus would be the last Western Roman emperor. And this, yes, of course, they sacked Rome again, because that's what you do. But Romulus Augustus basically he gave up almost completely. There was no fight at all. The Pope remained there, but the population of Rome by then was down to about maybe 50,000, and it was over 1 million people 150 years earlier. And it would be down to about 12,000 people by the end of the century. Which, if you don't have water or a way to get food to them, you can't live in a city. Cities can't function unless there's this modern network to bring goods. And this would become Odoacer. This map calls them Odovacar, because you can see the different spellings of them. So this map has a different one, but this is the one I've seen most commonly now. And the Ostrogoths would sweep into here and form an Ostrogothian kingdom, with the capital Ravenna. And then they would be defeated by the Eastern Roman Empire again, who still call themselves Romans, even though we call them Byzantines. And then I went to Winnipeg. I'm not even sure how I do this.
Witchcraft. Mr. Partridge is a witch.
Don't tell anybody. So 476 would be the end of the Roman Empire. And that's when you can say you'll get the beginnings of the Middle Ages, 500 to 1400. But during the Renaissance, they begin to call this the Dark Ages. And you see 500 to 800, this idea of the Roman Empire collapsing, civilization collapsing. That's a little bit unfair. It's much more complex than that. But they started calling that in the mid-1400s. That was the Dark Ages. So look how smart we were, even though they're just bringing back old Roman stuff. And 800, that's when Charlemagne would crown himself the new Roman emperor, and soon be called the Holy Roman Emperor. He was a Frankish king. And that's Odoacer. So you can argue that's the end of the empire. And I think I have one more thing I was going to tell you. There's Romulus surrendering right there. There's Odoacer coming in. And the last thing we just mentioned really quick, the Ostrogoths. Theodoric the Great would sweep into this area, so I mentioned before, defeating Odoacer. He was raised at Constantinople. This was a pretty common thing. The Ostrogoths made a deal with the Eastern Roman Empire that we'll basically agree not to attack. The Byzantines agreed not to attack their kingdom, and Theodoric was held as a hostage. So he grew up in the court of Constantinople. So he grew up with the emperor in Constantinople, treated like nobility, yet everybody knew he was held there, that if the Ostrogoths did anything, they'd kill him. And since he understood the power of the new Eastern Roman Empire as it was growing, he invaded into Italy. And that's their headquarters would be, or their capital would be in Ravenna. And the thing I put down, learning, many of the collected works of the Roman Empire that were in Rome, the poems, the history, have been destroyed in the repeated sackings. Ravenna, much of it survived. And then it would be kind of filtered out to the various monasteries. And so that's how much of it survived. But the big area that survived was the Eastern Roman Empire. And that would survive most of the works of the Romans, not so much in the Byzantines, but when the Arab warriors under the flag of Islam took it, they saved it. And they would fall to Byzantium in 555, and that's basically it of the Western Roman Empire. And so that is Rome, an amazing story. I've left out some stuff, but I really am fascinated with Rome. It always interests me. Oh. That is a very stylized picture of Theodoric. And when he crushed Odoacer, that's when he crushed the dragon. And so here he is fighting a dragon, and I don't know if that's blood's being spit out or something, but I thought it was a great picture of Theodoric, and so I wanted you to see it. And
Odoacer fat in that last picture.
What's that?
The one before that. Yeah, why is he like so fat?
They drew him. One of the reasons he was wealthy. So that's a sign of wealth. You had a good diet. You ate a lot. And so that's basically the way it would end right there. And we are not to the Byzantines, because the Byzantines would rise up again and try to reestablish Rome. And then the Bubonic plague hit. Then the Arabs hit. And on that happy note, let's look at the review. Oh, did I give you guys a review list?
No, we didn't get like hard copies.
Okay, I did put it online. So I wanted to make sure, and that's why one of the reasons I decided to slow it down a little bit, to make sure that I can give it to you now. And what did I do with it? I know I had copies. I made copies because I care about you. Oh, shoot. You're not an AP assistant. Ah. So I put down the ones. The fall of Rome will certainly be in. What I think I'm going to do about the fall of Rome is you have to answer the fall of Rome. The fall of Rome, you will have to answer that as short ID, but I'm going to say you can either do political, economic, or social. Does that make sense? One of those. I gave you a lot of information on that. And then I put a lot, the Republic, Punic Wars, Roman legions, about Caesar, and that would be about Caesar taking power. That's what I'm focusing on. Augustus and how he took power. The Arch, that's one that's kind of and I thought that'd be a good one to do about for Roman architecture. The bread and circuses, that's about the games. Remember, they occupy the people, give them enough to survive. Don't give them political freedom, but occupy them with games. The Day of Judgment. That's that kind of that very Semitic idea that a very fatalistic idea that there is a day of judgment coming, and so salvation is coming, and so that's why they accepted so many different messiahs. That's why they would revolt against the Romans, the most famous at Masada, and then of course, why so many people accepted that that Jesus wasn't the Messiah because of the Jewish idea. And then St. Paul, Constantine, Messiah, and then barbarians. Yeah. So what I'm gonna do on those, I'll give you like groups of 2 or 3 and have you pick those. I think maybe 4 and have you pick 2 from each group, kind of early and then later, and then that's you wrong. And then the rest of them, I'm just gonna ask very basic questions about that. Let's go ahead and take a second to look through the list. Are there any questions on the list? Anything you can think of? Yes.
So for the council of Nicaea, were they, I know we talked about it in the video, but it's a bunch of bishops who, did they kind of like set out how the rest of the citizens should follow?
Yeah.
Okay.
They wanted to make the one church.
Okay.
And so there are all the different disagreements, especially that Arianism that believed that God and Jesus were separate, that Jesus was the Son, but not necessarily divine to the same right. And what they said at the Council of Nicaea, that God and Jesus are one and the same.
Mr. Partridge,
Yes.
Lauren asks, what were the Sabine women and the role of ritual?
Oh, the role of ritual. So the role of ritual, that was when Rome was just starting after Romulus and Remus, when it's still a kingdom, and they want to fight and attack and do all that. What they did is they gave people rituals. So they're constantly doing rituals to the various gods, copying the Roman gods. They would do a ritual, and that would channel their aggressive energies. So it's a way to keep them from fighting all the time. Ritual has a way to control people. That's the big thing, it's control. If you're worried about trying to find ways to get into heaven, you're not worried about revolting or fighting or killing or murdering. And the Sabine women, Sabine was a village or a people near Rome right after, during when Romulus was king, and they tricked Sabine into having these games, and while they're getting ready for the games, the Romans came in and kidnapped all the women. And that's how because they're all men there. And that would be, I could wait to say Rome would do whatever it took to get what they wanted. Any others? Now I got the screen up. Yes.
What's Justinian's code? Or Jihad, however you say it.
Where?
At the top.
You know, that was one I only just mentioned in class. I'm not going to ask a question on Justinian's code. That was that was to make Roman law more stable.
Okay.
And I'm just going to ask 12 tables. I'll just ask 12 tables. So Justinian's code at the top of the second column. Yeah, there's a bunch of battles. Pater families, that's ruled by man, the male-dominated family. We have emperors as gods, Roman state religion. Here we've talked about all these: salvation, Judas, pantheon. Remember, Varius was the one who went into Germany with a legion and got ambushed during Augustus, and Augustus would walk around. Varius, what did you do with my legions? Yes, question.
Philippi?
Oh, Philippi. So that's where Anthony and Octavian, who was soon to become Augustus, that's where they would defeat the murderers of Caesar, like Brutus and the rest.
Oh, okay.
Remember the Macedonian Wars? That's where the Romans finally defeated the Macedonian phalanxes and took over Macedonia and Greece. Crossing the Rubicon, that's when Caesar crossed against orders and would conquer or would come into Rome, triggering a civil war, and eventually make himself permanent consul. Remember, Augustus would take that military title of imperator and make himself imperator, which is where we get emperor. That'd be Augustus, that military title. You mentioned the destruction of Jerusalem, and that was under, well, Titus, who did that. Valentia was the. Any questions? Etruscans, Sabine William. Remember, Cincinnatus was he'd be the example of the Roman senator who was given the power of a dictator, so the crisis was over, and gave up power, going back to the Republic. He would be the idol of men like George Washington. George Washington gave up power after the Revolutionary War, and he said it's like Cincinnatus. Can you guess how many would actually give up power? Okay, I think Cleopatra. Remember Marius? Don't forget Marius. Marius was the guy who started the Roman legion. So Marius and Roman legions go hand in hand. That's in the second column. Remember Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus tried to become tribune of the plebs to help the poor. Remember, the tribune of the plebs was the person who spoke for the poor working people. Sulla was the brutal patrician who murdered his enemies and died of overeating. I guess his stomach exploded. I guess he was like stuffing peacock eggs and that's something I wish I wasn't there for. But I was. Hadrian's Wall. Diocletian split the empire. Constantine, we know a lot about Constantine. His capital, Constantinople. Most of the questions are going to be very basic. You just have to know more detail for the short IDs. Remember that one, you have to explain what it is, give an example, why it's important. 3 to 4 sentences. And I'm looking at about 5. So everybody back home in the viewing audience, you have to log in. Vandals, Huns, Shalons, we got a lot here. The Goths, Council, Romulus and Remus. Remember that the issue always about debt. Farmers would be free and go into debt and become slaves. Spartacus and the slave rebellion. Legia. Got Nero, Vespasian. Vespasian's the person, it'd be his son Titus who would destroy Jerusalem. He's the guy after the year of 4 emperors who would at least kind of reestablish rule. I don't know why, but Pontegard's that really big aqueduct. That's in my, that's what I'm, on my screen on Teams, I'm sending by Pontegard. I do another castle.
Oh, so in that picture, Mr. Partridge,
Yeah.
in the really big ones that have like the multiple layers of arches,
Yeah.
is the water only flowing through the very top and the rest of it is just structure?
Yeah. It's in a very deep valley. So they had to go up to, yeah, the canal goes on the top of the mountain ridge and then over the aqueduct and then keeps going. And yeah, you can go, I think I told you, you can sometimes go down that and float down that. But it's really hot. I mean,
that sounds nerve-wracking.
What's that?
That sounds terrifying.
Yeah, and the water runs right at the edge of it. But it's a good. Oh, that picture's not up anymore. I gotta get the picture back up. Oh well. I'll get the picture of it back up. Any more questions? So just a bunch of I'm going to do this in multiple choice. Oh, we don't have the picture because I don't have my. Got to get a new computer. I've got to change it. I promise I'll have a new picture next week. Maybe with the if we're going to do Islam, I'll do the Civic Center. They kind of copied the Eastern argument of the Masons. No questions? Anything? So it's going to be, 35 or so questions and then some short IDs. So have your computers, everyone else log in. So I'll open it up at about 12:15. Okay, so I did put down, it just dropped. It's an assignment, but I also have copies for everybody, so you get it when you come in. But we're gonna start the Islamic world and a new map. So you can study or start the map right now. Sound good? And then tomorrow I'm gonna give you your project. You gotta make a castle, full size. I want a big castle. So I don't know why there's a little X's here.
Oh, yeah.
So out of curiosity,
No
Mr.
idea why that happened. I made this myself, so I had to scan it. I did not draw the map. Normally I would draw the map.
Mr. Partridge, for our castle assignment, is this like a group project where we all pitch in, or do you want like multiple residences?
I want multiple, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I will give you the assignment. Yep, you don't have to do just castles. So there are other things you can do, but it's just a fun little thing. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give it to you now, but I'm not gonna give you any homework for the most part, over Festivus. But you have a project over Christmas break. So I'll post it, I'll put it on Teams, online. Tomorrow we got the map, test tomorrow. Let's try to make chainmail. If anybody has a question, I'll give you time to study. Please ask right now. I'm just gonna kind of hang out. I'm gonna try to get my Pointe Garde picture up. So if anybody has a question, text me, write me, or you send me a message on Teams. Make sure you have all your material. It's going to be so much fun. No, about 35 questions. I'll make most of them very basic, and then short IDs you should have no sweat. And don't forget, Fall of Rome, there will definitely be one. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.
Bye.